high. For those who experience regular panic attacks then, what can you do to safely start getting them back under control? There are a few different options available to you, but the aim is to A. Get yourself to safety, and B. Start to address the symptoms. Here we will look at how best to manage a situation where you find yourself beginning to suffer from an attack. Panic attack symptoms. Before you can begin to treat a panic attack, you first need to be able to identify the symptoms of one. This will give you early warnings so you can begin to put a plan into action that will help you to calm yourself down and return to normal function. The symptoms of a panic attack then include O rapid heart rate, O shallow breathing, O racing, negative thoughts, O sweating, O muscle tension, O dizziness, O chest pain, O pacing. Often the heart rate can reach the point where it is so intense that it feels like you are having a heart attack. In fact, this is one of the big problems many people face when suffering from panic attacks. They become convinced that they are suffering from a heart attack, which causes them to panic even more. The symptoms take about 10 to 20 minutes to reach their peak and will often then subside, but sometimes take several hours. Of course, it is very important to get yourself checked if you think there is any chance that you might be suffering from a heart attack. Note, however, that in cases of heart attack the feeling of dread will tend to precede the elevated heart rate or the stress. Panic attacks also cause shaking, restlessness, rapid and shallow breathing, nausea, and butterflies in the stomach. The best way to describe a panic attack is as being very similar to a fight or flight response, but turned up to 11. If you have ever had to give a speech in public which you've been scared to give, if you have ever had a confrontation with someone in the street, or if you've ever gotten into a serious argument with someone in a shop, then you will likely have experienced these symptoms. This is what a panic attack feels like, but a little worse, and with the added breathing issues and dizziness. If that's what you're experiencing, then you're probably suffering with a panic attack and not a heart attack. You can be fairly sure of this, in fact, but if you are ever uncertain, then it's always worth speaking with your GP to be on the safe side. Consider as well the aspect of demographics and risk factors. Heart attacks are actually very unlikely unless you're someone who is in an at-risk bracket. The next way to tell the difference between panic attack or heart attack is to examine the precise nature of the chest pain. Often it's the chest pain that makes us suspect we are having a heart attack, when in fact it is just a panic attack. However, the chest pain associated with each is actually quite different. In a heart attack, for instance, the pain is normally described as a crushing pain and a dull ache, as though someone is sitting on your chest, causing a shortness of breath. This is then often experienced alongside pain in one arm, in the jaw and in the neck. In a panic attack, meanwhile, the difficulty breathing is actually caused by hyperventilation rather than heart problems, and this will be experienced as low CO2 and dizziness, as opposed to a feeling as though you're about to suffocate. Any tightness in the chest will be caused by muscle contractions that are the result of stress. What is a normal heart rate during a panic attack? Seeing as anxiety increases your heart rate, via adrenaline, and panic attacks are essentially extreme anxiety episodes, it makes sense that your heart rate should increase at this time. But what is a normal panic attack heart rate? Unfortunately, the answer is not that straightforward. For starters, everyone has a different resting heart rate to begin with, meaning they start from different baselines. An athlete may have a resting heart rate as low as 40 bpm or less, whereas someone unhealthy could have a heart rate as high as 120 bpm when they're not doing anything. Fitness dictates heart rate to a large extent because exercise strengthens the heart. The stronger the heart becomes as a muscle, the more it will be able to drive blood around the body with each beat. Ultimately, this means that a very strong heart won't need to beat as rapidly in order to circulate as much blood. Other factors also affect heart rate, however, include blood viscosity and vasodilation, height, metabolism, and more. Even the air temperature can affect your heart rate. Some perfectly healthy people have high heart rates for seemingly no reason. A panic attack heart rate then is likely to result in a marked and sudden spike for that individual, though it might still be beating slower than some people not having a panic attack. As a general rule though, you can likely expect a panic attack heart rate to be anything from 100 to 170 bpm, equivalent to an intensive bout of exercise. What's also important to keep in mind though, is that everyone experiences panic attacks differently and every case of a panic attack is different. Managing anxiety and panic attacks in the short term, there are a few things you can do to help manage the symptoms of a panic attack and to get yourself back under control and to safety. Get to safety. The first and most important thing to do during a panic attack is to get yourself to safety. Panic attacks cause hyperventilation, lightheadedness, and disassociation. In other words, there is a real danger of falling over or having an accident, especially if you are in charge of a vehicle. For these reasons, you should try to get to safety immediately if you notice the symptoms of a panic attack beginning to set in, and that way you can make sure that you won't be likely to fall over or to crash a vehicle. If you are in public, tell someone how you are feeling and then find a quiet spot to sit down where you can breathe quietly. If you are driving, then calmly take the next opportunity to pull over. Treat hyperventilation. If you are suffering a full-blown panic attack, then there is a good chance that you might be suffering with hyperventilation. This happens when we get overexcited, which in turn leads to us breathing rapidly and thus lowering CO2. This is also the reason that panic attacks will often lead to feelings of lightheadedness and dizziness, and why they can even cause you to fall over or pass out. There are multiple different types of treatment for hyperventilation, and all of these can give you good ideas of what to do during a panic attack to help get your breathing back in order. Breathe slowly. With or without hyperventilation, it is important to get your breathing under control and to make a conscious effort to try and breathe deeply and slowly. This is one of the main methods recommended by cognitive behavioral therapists as a way to prevent the panic attack symptoms and to help restore order. Breathing deeply and slowly is effective because it encourages the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the system within the body that acts contrary to the sympathetic nervous system, and which puts the body in a restful rest and digest state that is essentially the opposite of the fight or flight response. Breathe into a bag. Panic attacks often trigger hyperventilation, which essentially means you start breathing faster and faster to the point where you upset the balance of carbon dioxide in your blood. In other words, too much CO2 and not enough O2. The solution is to breathe into a bag, which forces you to rebreathe the same air, thus adjusting the balance back to normal and healthy levels. Use medications. As mentioned, you might find that using some form of medication or perhaps essential oils can be useful for treating symptoms in the short term. If you really can't afford to have an attack, then this is a good way to reduce the symptoms. Over time though, the objective is to use the skills taught in the next section to avoid needing medication at all. Calm your thoughts. When we have panic attacks, they will often occur alongside anxious thoughts, and these can include fears of death among other things. As mentioned, these ruminations are both symptoms of panic attacks and causative factors, thus creating a vicious cycle. Key in recovering from panic attacks then is to try and stay calm. This in turn means being disciplined with your thoughts and using positive affirmations, etc. to try and reassure yourself that nothing bad is going to happen. You can learn thought techniques designed to help you combat panic attacks by seeing a cognitive behavioral therapist. These are therapists that provide thinking tools which can help you to know what to do during a panic as well as during phobic responses and in a number of other situations. In general, try to remind yourself that the best course of action is to let the attack run its course. As long as you are sitting down and you're safe, a panic attack poses no danger to you and is nothing to be embarrassed about. The sooner you can learn this and believe it, the sooner the symptoms will stop arising in the first place. So the best thing you can actually do? That is to simply act normal. And it's practicing this ability to act normal that will actually help you to decrease the occurrence of panic attacks in the long term. How to combat anxiety and panic attacks by controlling your thoughts and emotions. But where do these anxiety and panic attack hormones come from in the first place? The answer relates back to what we've learned about neurotransmitters and hormones in previous chapters. As we know, these are released from vesicles, little sacs, at the terminal points of our neurons. When our brain does something in action, potential fires causing electricity to nip along our neurons. This in turn releases a number of chemicals that tell us how we should feel about that thing, whether or not it's important and whether or not we should cement the experience as a permanent memory. In other words then, it is the formation and connection of specific neurons, releasing specific neurotransmitters which lead to anxiety and panic attacks. And this web of interconnected neurons is formed by our experiences and our thought processes, resulting in what is known as a connectome. The key point to bear in mind here is that it's all going on in your head. It's all to do with the way that your brain has encoded information, and it's all to do with the way that you perceive what is happening. In other words, if you see a lion but you think it's a cat, then you will produce oxytocin instead of adrenaline, and you will die. Likewise, if you see a dead lion and think you can make it just fine, then you will produce serotonin instead of cortisol. It's not actually the danger itself that is causing you to have the panic attack, it's your perception of danger. And for some of us, our perception is completely skewed and not a fair reflection of the reality. This is why some people end up with phobias and anxiety disorders. And in the case of panic attacks, this is very often related to agoraphobia or other phobias. You feel corners, you feel exposed, you feel jostled, and this causes you to overreact to the situation. Throw in your response to the experience of the panic attack itself and you can end up working yourself up to the point of passing out. That is a panic attack in a nutshell. The good news is that you rewire your brain by changing the way you think about things, and this in turn means you have more neuronal patterns that release positive hormones than negative ones. And that's how you improve your anxiety and panic attacks. The problem is, that when you have a brain that's already swimming with stress hormones, this makes it very difficult for you to think positive about things and to form those more positive beliefs that will help to combat stress. Thus you need to use mental discipline in order to help yourself overcome that stress. The AWARE technique for panic attacks mental discipline means reminding yourself constantly that what you're experiencing is not as bad as you think it is. Or that at least, believing it's bad will only make matters worse. An example of how this works is the AWARE technique that is often used for treating anxiety and panic attacks. This goes as follows: A. Accept the anxiety and don't try to fight it. W. Watch the anxiety as though you were an observer. A. Act normal. R. Repeat the other steps. E. Expect the best. Feel it start to work. This is essentially a top-down approach that helps you to distance yourself from the anxiety by intellectualizing it. Simply by acting normal and going about your usual business, you can essentially teach yourself that a panic attack isn't a big deal. And the sooner you do this, the sooner you can start to relax and put yourself more at ease. Another strategy is one taught in cognitive behavioral therapy, which involves looking at the things you're afraid of that caused the anxiety and panic attacks and then assessing whether they're logical fears. Can you really get a heart attack from a panic attack? No. Will people really laugh at you if you faint? No. Again, this forces you to think logically about what's happening and thus to change the way you respond to stressors. Similarly, you can think about the things that caused the anxiety in the first place differently. Are you really like to be fired if you are late for work? No. Is there really any reason to get stressed when you can't do anything about it anyway? No. We'll talk a lot more about CBT in the next chapter of this book. Practice. Be disciplined, and over time you'll find that your panic attacks become less frequent and less severe. Exposure therapy. Another type of therapy that is focused around overcoming fear of panic attacks is exposure therapy. This is a type of therapy often used in the treatment of phobias and involves exposing the individual to the thing they are afraid of in controlled conditions so that they learn there's no reason to be afraid of them. Exposure therapy can also be useful for treating panic attacks. Here, it is employed by the patient allowing themselves to experience the symptoms of a panic attack once again in a controlled setting. This way, you can become familiar with the way they feel and you can learn to differentiate them from heart attacks or other conditions. What's more, you will gradually learn that panic attacks in themselves are not dangerous, and while they might be uncomfortable, they don't generally lead to any negative consequences. As long as you can sit down quietly somewhere, they pass and really there's nothing to be afraid of. Note that exposure therapy here can also be used to combat phobias, which may be particularly helpful if phobias are what are causing the anxiety attacks. For instance, if you have a phobia of crowds and this is causing panic attacks, slowly exposing yourself to bigger and bigger crowds under controlled conditions is a very good strategy for coping.